Hello there, my RPG lovers, and welcome to another video. It's been around 3 months since I last did one of these videos, or even longer if you want to count the actual Hidden Gems or Trash series by numbers.
Maybe we can help each other out.
I apologize for the long wait, but let me just say that I have a lot more games to cover in this series. If you're new around here, welcome. This is a series of videos where I cover some old and forgotten RPGs, action-adventure, hack-and-slash games, and so on. You can check out the full playlist if you want to catch up, especially if you want me to cover some particular games, because there is a high possibility I already did. So sit back, grab some drinks, and let me tell you about some obscure games that I've been playing recently. Welcome to the 13th episode of Hidden Gems or Trash. Hope you enjoy. Number 5. Ravensword Shadowlands.
Ready your blades, lads. To battle! Glory for Tyrius!
This one is a highly requested game for this series, believe it or not. Ravensword Shadowlands came out in 2013 for Android and iOS devices. A bit later, it got a PC and Linux ports, and a lot later it came out on PS4 and Xbox One in 2021. I grabbed the PS4 version, which I played on my PS5. I remember this game from way back in the day, and how excited I was to play a quote-unquote Skyrim-like RPG on my crappy Android phone. I know what you think by just looking at this game, but trust me, this was kinda crazy back in 2013 for a phone RPG. I could never play it properly on my phone, by the way, because it sucked. It's a totally different story when you try to play something like this on your PC or console, especially nowadays. A very different story. You have a couple of options on PS5 before you start the game, like the view distance for some reason, sensitivity, difficulty and music. But you know what it doesn't have? The option to control the camera like a normal person, because the controls are inverted for the Y-axis. Yeah, you're forced to play like this and you can't do anything about it, because go fuck yourself. But let's start with the story first. After the fall of Ravengard, the world tumbled into chaos. The Ravensword was lost and the dark times began. The Dark Elven invaders attacked human settlements throughout the Kingdom of Tyrese? I don't know. That's pretty much all you get, and a short little narrated segment after that about the big battle. You're the only survivor of this battle, and you wake up in the nearby village. The battle is the tutorial for the game, and yeah, this is a 2013 Android RPG. Actually, it looks like a 2002 RPG, but never mind, maybe the gameplay is good. Although when the AI forgets how to AI in the first 5 minutes, I won't get my hopes up. You can just spam attacks with no rhyme or reason, but hey, it's just a tutorial, okay? It gets way better after this, trust me. You almost die after this epic cutscene, but this is where the real game begins. You even get to make your own character with some customization options which don't do that much. After you wake up in the Champions Guild, Lena tells you that you're the only survivor and the guild master wants to talk with you. There is some voice acting here and there for a couple of sentences in dialogue, but the rest of it is not voice acted, which is fine.
Be wary, traveler. There are many dangers in the forest.
Instead of talking to the guy I was supposed to talk with, I decided to start exploring a little bit. This game has a first and third person perspectives, which is kinda impressive for a 2013 phone game. But don't get too excited. If you even try to use a shield in first person, it covers almost 90% of your screen. Okay. Speaking of covering your whole screen, the minimap is freaking huge. Third person perspective works okay, but strafing left and right is much slower than going forward for some reason. To give the game some credit, the village has a bit of charm to it, and you can visit some shops and talk with some NPCs. You can break the barrels, which have some nice physics effects, but that's pretty much it. Your first quest leads you to the nearby woods, and you have to kill some boars along the way. I can't figure out if this game actually has a combo system for melee attacks, but don't think that much about it. It works the best when you spam the attack button. As you can probably tell, the melee combat is very mindless. The sound effects are not horrible, but the sound mixing is beyond horrible. I had to lower the volume a lot in the game menu and on my speakers because it frequently has extremely high spikes that will pierce your fucking skull. Anyway, it gets better after this, trust me, okay? You have to do a quest for some mage that got stuck in the bottle, and in order to do this you have to go through a troll-infested cave and fill up the bottle with water. This game has a leveling up system and some RPG stats, as you would expect. The weapons also have skills which will improve upon use, and my skill with the blade almost maxed out in the first 30 minutes of gameplay. Not because the game is a joke, it's because I'm just that good in RPGs, you know. And let me remind you that I'm still playing with inverted camera controls, which make me a god at this game. Anyway, killing trolls reminds you about the shaky camera, and you can even land hits without the attack animation. Probably because my skill with the blade is very high, you know. It's very hard to appreciate it now while playing on the PC or console, but seeing stuff like this on your crappy Android phone from 2013 was mind-blowing. Playing, well, not so much, but still. I really couldn't drag myself to finish this game, even though it was only supposed to be around 4 hours long. The so bad it's good aspect of the game wears out pretty fast, and you're left with the abysmal mobile port that wasn't supposed to exist. Yeah, I lied, it doesn't get better. Number 4. Pagan Apps and Gods. Pagan Apps and Gods, or Pagan Online as they used to call it before, is an action RPG released in 2019. This game was supposed to be an online co-op ARPG, but somewhere in the middle of development they decided to turn it into single-player ARPG. Probably because they didn't see enough interest from the players, and maintaining servers is not cheap. This is where they renamed the game to Pagan Apps and Gods and tried to turn it into a single-player ARPG. It's understandable that a lot of people got pissed off because the online co-op aspect was one of the main appeals for the game. Putting that aside, the single-player campaign of the game starts off really promising and it leaves some good first impressions. You get to choose between 10 different heroes, which offer unique playstyles. I think they did a great job with making these classes seem unique and not just a cookie-cutter ARPG classes, even though you will find some of those as well, which is to be expected. They all have skill trees, different stats and abilities, and I got to play with the big barbarian dude, and I also tried the Reaper guy a little bit. The story and setting of Pagan is related to Slavic mythology.
Without the gods, there would be no balance. Without the balance, there would be no life.
The gods have disappeared from the realm, and your job is to find out what happened. That's pretty much the whole gist of the story. You have a hub area called the Pantheon, and all the important characters you meet throughout the game will eventually end up here. In order for them to do that, they need to die first, but for some reason only you can be revived and sent back to the world of the living. Your guide is an old guy called Mystic, and he leads you throughout various missions in the game. I always thought that Slavic mythology is not explored enough in RPGs, and I might be a bit biased when it comes to this, as a Slav myself. The story is not really that important in this game, but they did a decent job with the presentation, the dialogue is solid, and it's good enough to keep you motivated to see what happens next. But let's talk about what truly matters, which will be the gameplay, of course.
Must not falter.
I started playing the game with a controller, but it doesn't work properly, no matter what you try to do, so you have to play with mouse and keyboards. That was not a problem at all, because the game controls great with mouse and keyboards. Pagan has a great WASD movement, which gives you a great sense of control over your character. You auto-attack with your left mouse click, and the default control scheme for using abilities is actually very intuitive. You can of course rebind keys however you like, but I found the default control scheme great in general. For example, the left shift is used for the dash ability, which is like a dodge. My right click uses a very strong one-hit ability, the space is for the leap, middle mouse button for a range attack, and so on.
Does not perish here.
Moving your character around in combat feels great, and I always felt in full control over my character, which is a huge plus. Your character remains mobile even while performing auto attacks, but you move a lot slower in general. Your abilities feel punchy, with a decent amount of impact on hit, and the sound effects are very nice, which makes the combat even more satisfying. To add to the list of good things about the game, enemies have satisfying ragdoll physics. You can see dozens of dead bodies flying in the air at once when you use some abilities, it's very cool. So what's exactly the problem here? Well, the game has some baffling design choices, which makes the single player experience very tedious. Along with the underwhelming character progression and itemization systems, Pagan the Absent Gods becomes very repetitive and boring after you complete a couple of chapters. You start unlocking various gameplay features in the Pantheon as you progress through the game. These NPCs will provide you services like crafting, buying potions, investing points into the skill tree, and so on. That's all fine, but like I said, the character progression in the game is not very good. You'll get almost all abilities after about 4 or 5 hours of gameplay, and that's everything you'll ever need. Well, sort of. It seems like Pagan still has some annoying gatekeeping mechanics that will keep you from progressing. You have to do some grinding for better gear to increase your power level. I have no problems with grinding in ARPGs if the game has reasonable gameplay mechanics and enjoyable gameplay. Pagan certainly has an enjoyable combat, but literally everything else is lacking in a big way. The mission design is just horrible. Every time you start fighting enemies, you're limited to a small chunk of map, and you can't leave until you defeat all enemies. You just go where the big yellow arrow tells you to go until you reach the last wave of enemies or a boss fight. The boss fights are okay, they're not bad, but if you die, you have to restart the whole freaking level. Yeah, you go right at the beginning of the level, and once again you have to fight through waves of enemies until you get to the boss fight again. I don't know who thought this was a good idea, it's just a bad game design. The itemization system is also pretty bad, you can only find new weapons and a couple of more miscellaneous items you can equip. There are no armor pieces for a character, which is a huge mistake in my opinion. When you have such underwhelming itemization system, bad progression and bad mission design, even the best combat system can't redeem the game. It quickly becomes repetitive, especially if you die a couple of times on the boss fight and have to repeat the whole thing over and over again. By the way, you can't play with other heroes until you get a specific currency in the game, which is just terrible. I have no idea if this is supposed to be a currency you buy in the store for real money or something, but whatever it is, it's just bad. You have to do assassination missions to get this currency, but in order to do that, you need some special keys. Yeah, it's stupid. Just let me play the game with other heroes, man, what the fuck. It's a shame because Pagan had the right idea for the combat, which is the hardest thing to get right. I wouldn't recommend trying this game out, even if you're really curious.
Do not mess with the king!
Number 3. Aluna, Sentinel of the Shards.
I need more energy. My spear is true.
Aluna Sentinel of the Shards is a pretty obscure ARPG which came out in 2021. This game is set in 16th century Latin America and it looks absolutely gorgeous. I think they managed to nail the artistic style and you're going to explore some great looking areas. Yeah, I really like how this game looks in general, and these guys used everything they had in the best way possible. Unfortunately, we can't say the same for the animations. A lot of animations look pretty stiff and awkward, but the combat itself is pretty decent.
For my master!
we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's start with the story first. Well, there isn't much to say about the story in this game. You play as the demigod called Aluna, and you have to stop the evil army of mythological beasts and not so mythical animals like bears.
Run away now, or I am Aluna.
No, but seriously, I hate fighting these fucking bears in the game. Anyway, Aluna is in the possession of a special shard, which has the piece of her mother's hearts. Her mother was basically a goddess, and she gives you the quest to find other shards, so she can pinpoint the source of this evil. The whole game is voice acted, which is highly appreciated, although the voice acting is not very good to be honest, and maybe it's even AI voices, I don't know.
The animals are being corrupted by some force. They are no longer in harmony with the order of nature.
The dialogue is pretty bad in general.
Nagaric will capture your village and then slay your people.
You're wrong.
The 16th century Latin America with fantasy elements is a pretty cool idea for the setting, and the story itself is good enough to push you forward throughout the game. But like I said, the dialogue leaves a lot to be desired. So what about the gameplay? I was motivated enough to go through the whole game, so that can possibly tell you a lot about the gameplay itself. It's not amazing by any means, and like I mentioned before, the animations are not that great. However, Aluna controls pretty good. I played with my Xbox Series X controller, and it's a pretty responsive game in general. Moving around feels good, as well as using abilities. You can also dodge with your right thumbstick, but I found this ability almost useless. It doesn't have any iframes, and you're going to get hit anyway, so I don't see the point. It's only useful sometimes against bosses who have big AoE abilities, but that's pretty much it. Although when I switch to range build, there is a cool passive ability which automatically fires your ranged weapon when you dodge. My first impressions of the melee build I was going for was solid. I love the spin to win move that 99% of ARPGs have nowadays, and you have more than enough active abilities to learn as you level up. Some of them are way worse than others, and I didn't even unlock all of them because I started investing some points in other two skill trees, mostly in passive abilities. You have 3 skill trees with ranged, melee and magic abilities. There are some passive skills in all skill trees that you have to get no matter which playstyle you're going for, like regenerating your energy and health. Here's the thing though, you pretty much have to focus on only one of these skill trees, because the game has some pretty annoying difficulty spikes. No matter which difficulty you choose, there are some situations where you're going to get 1 or 2 shotted. Although to be fair, easy is actually very easy most of the time. I noticed that ranged playstyle is way easier than melee, which is not surprising to me at all. It's usually like this in most ARPGs, and if NPCs don't have abilities which allow them to close the gap sometimes, it's very easy to kite them. In order to create a very compelling ranged playstyle that doesn't feel OP, your game has to have at least a decent AI system, there is no way around it. But in reality, most AI systems in smaller ARPGs is very basic. When I switched to the range skill tree, I blasted through the game on normal with no issues. Before that, some enemies in the mid and late game could pretty much one-shot me, which didn't feel fair at all. Now of course, this also depends on the gear you have, and Aluna has a standard ARPG loot system, but it's not that good. Yeah, yet another ARPG in this video with a bad itemization system. It's better than Pagan for sure, but that's not saying much. The difficulty spikes can be brutal, even on normal difficulty. I switched between hard and normal quite a bit, or even easy, when the game got really annoying. The game just didn't feel very fair when I got one-shotted, and I guess it requires you to grind a little bit for better items. But that's the problem with these smaller ARPGs with mediocre gameplay. You can have some fun while playing, but overcoming the arbitrary difficulty doesn't feel that fun. It's not the kind of difficulty that feels fair with some mechanics that you have to worry about, it's just pure numbers. Items have a decent variety, you can find one-handed and two-handed weapons and some different armor pieces. It's easy to see when you get an upgrade, and you can feel it in the combat as well. Even though the melee combat started decent, it got really frustrating in the mid and the late game, so I switched to ranged and never looked back. The ranged gameplay felt really mindless or normal, so I switched back on hards. The bosses were okay at best, but I guess I enjoyed this game enough to care about finishing it. It took around 8 hours by the way, but you can get a bit more if you want to see everything that the game has to offer. It's a very mediocre ARPG at best, but it knows exactly what it's trying to be. It's hard to recommend unless you really don't know what to play and you love this genre of ARPGs.
It's beautiful! You're wrong!
Number 2. Legend, Hand of Gods. This game came out in late 2007 only on PC and it's been delisted on Steam. It's abandonware, but you can easily find it and download it with a simple Google search. The only technical issue that you might have is the old version of NVIDIA PhysX driver that you'll have to install. I'll leave the link for that in the description. Other than that, I was able to run the game in 4K with no major issues. Even the UI scales perfectly to high resolutions, which is usually not the case with such older games. There are some frame drops here and there, but for the most part the game runs smoothly. Actually, I had a minor issue with the text font in the game. It looks like there is no space between the words, which makes it awkward and a bit harder to read.
That's not a good sign.
Maybe this is because of the high resolution, I'm not sure, but it didn't bother me a lot. As you can probably tell, Legend Hand of God has aged very well when it comes to the visuals. We can easily compare this ARPG with other similar games from this time period, like Titan Quest for example. You can even argue that this game looks better, although Titan Quest has a more stylized look and a much higher budget by the way. So it's definitely impressive how a smaller studio from Germany managed to develop a great looking isometric ARPG in 2007.
I believe you.
The way the game does lighting is also interesting because your mouse cursor is actually a light elf called Aluna. Aluna will light up darker areas, talk with you,
I think we're in the wrong place.
give you tips and so on. She's essentially your companion. Cosma Shiva Hagen is the German-American actress who voiced the light elf by the way. She was also featured in box art promotions for the game, so there's that. You'll spend a lot of time in the beginning exploring forest areas and some dark dungeons, but then you'll move on to desert-like areas as well as the snowy mountains. The vegetation in this game is quick to show you those sweet PhysX driver effects. The grass never stops moving, so I guess it's always windy in the game or something. And of course, the vegetation interacts with NPCs and the player in a very satisfying way. So what's this game all about, C4G? Well, I'm glad you asked. Nerds. You play as a hero called Targon, who is about to be accepted as an adept into the Order of the Holy Flame. During the night before his initiation, the Eternal Flame goes out and the lands of Aris is once again haunted by demons. All NPCs and the dialogue is fully voice acted, which is quite impressive actually.
My wife and child suddenly fell ill when the dead rose from their graves. People say it's because of the curse of the Lich, but I know the true reason.
Again, we're talking about an RPG from 2007 by a small studio, so yeah, I find that quite impressive.
Is that so? Well then, you have my gratitude.
No.
Luna has a very annoying voice. Although the pitch of her voice makes sense because she's a little elf, but that doesn't make it more enjoyable to listen.
The east path leads to Turrent, and the northern moor lies to the north. Okay, so where else would you find the northern moor?
To be honest, no.
Legend Hand of God had an interesting marketing pitch for the gameplay. They described it as cinematic combat system that enables realistic 3D fights. Okay. Come to think of it, many action adventures from this time period used similar verbiage to describe the gameplay mechanics. Anyway, this game functions very similar to most action RPGs of its kind. You use your mouse to move and attack enemies, and you can rotate the camera with WASD. Legend Hand of God doesn't have the most responsive control scheme, but moving around and attacking feels okay. It starts to feel a bit janky when you try to do some actions a bit faster. For example, I use this jumping attack quite a bit, and I would have to move away from the enemy in order to use it. But moving away from the fight can feel extremely janky, especially if the enemy is in the middle of the attack that's going to hit you. On the other side, I could use this ability up to 5 times in a row sometimes, which felt pretty good. There seems to be some parts of the game which block your actions and the field of view of the enemy, even though they don't look like it.
I can't do that.
The melee combat is very static as well, which makes most fights feel like a stat check. I mean, it's not like most ARPGs from back in the day had skill-based abilities where you had to dodge or move out of the way, but still. Every bigger enemy and bosses are pretty much the same, it's not that fun to fight them. That being said, killing regular enemies feels satisfying, which is one of the most important things to get right. If you pay attention to animations, you'll notice how enemies react properly to getting hit. Their body will usually bounce in the direction of the hit, and this also applies to the player. I guess this is one of the reasons why they call this a cinematic combat system, I don't know. It looks pretty cool though, and I can't think of another old ARPG that tried to do something similar. When you get in fights against bigger enemies like giants and many different reskins of the same enemy, your character completely changes his attack animations. Yeah, this took me by surprise when it first happened, because I never saw anything similar. You get totally different animations, which seem a bit more appropriate for fighting bigger enemies like this. Then again, you'll get to fight some other big enemies in the game, and your animations won't change like this, you'll use default attack animations. The first time it happened it seemed cool, but it quickly gets annoying because your attacks are much slower. Combined with the hit chance, which was pretty low on my character because I forgot to invest points into dexterity, it makes these fights a drag. Although the second part of that wasn't the game's fault, I just dumped my points into strength and constitution. I actually almost ruined my melee build because of this, but I started investing more points into dexterity as I leveled up. You equip items by dragging them from the bags to your character model, and you can also unequip items like this. Even though it can be a bit annoying, I like this quirky feature and it reminds me of Morrowind a little bit. The hit chance I mentioned before also reminds me of Morrowind, and not in a fun way. Look, there is certainly a place for hit chances in RPGs, but having them in these types of games feels redundant. Especially when your control scheme is not that responsive, it only makes the action feel worse. Right off the bat, you get to choose 2 specializations for a character. This means that you have 2 different skill trees, basically. When you level up, you get points for both of these talent trees, and you can choose between some passive and active abilities. The itemization system is heavily based around your specialization choice. Overall, I had fun while playing this game, and I might even do a second playthrough in the future.
What a brilliant idea!
I would highly recommend checking it out if you can bother with installing Abandonware games on your PC. Number 1. Space Siege.
Those poor bastards. I can't do that.
Space Siege is an action sci-fi RPG which came out in 2008 on PC. It's a long-lost brother of Dungeon Siege, a series of ARPGs that I covered a couple of months ago on the channel. The whole Dungeon Siege series was really underrated in general, and I'm willing to bet that most people didn't even know that Space Siege even exists.
Delta Squad, assemble a demolitions team and blow that pod back out into space!
Especially nowadays, because this game has been unlisted for a very long time. This spin-off game has a lot of similarities with Dungeon Siege, obviously, but it's far less complex. Come to think of it, that's nothing unusual when it comes to spin-offs. It's a more straightforward ARPG with a sci-fi setting. While Dungeon Siege focused on party gameplay, Space Siege has a single protagonist. and you only get one companion that will join you, which will be your robot. Getting this game to work properly today requires some small tweaks. High resolutions work perfectly, and even the UI scales properly. One of the problems I had was with the character animation. It was very jittery when he moves, and to be honest, I don't even know how I fixed this. I was messing around with various settings in and out of game, and maybe changing the FPS cap fixed it somehow, I don't know. You can also have the problem with the mouse cursor, or the lack of it. This problem is fixable by editing the ini file and setting the full screen option to false. That's pretty much it when it comes to the technical side of things. Space Siege takes place in the far future, where Earth has just been destroyed by the Karak, an insect-like race of aliens. The game takes place on the colony ship invaded by Karak, and you play as a security officer called Seth Walker. Your trusty companion is called HRV, or Harvey. Yeah, Harvey sounds much better than HIV, I mean HRV. I swear man, whoever came up with this was just f***ing with us.
I tried to appropriate that unit for my use, but was unsuccessful.
Anyway, Seth and Harvey need to fight through the waves of aliens and do various quests in order to stop the aliens. You even have some meaningful choices to make, or a choice to be more precise, which affects the ending of the game. You see, Seth can have cybernetic implants, which will affect the gameplay in a couple of ways, but you can also choose not to have cybernetics for story reasons. I think it's stupid if you choose not to use them, because it increases your power quite a bit. To go back to the beginning, the combat is very straightforward in this game. You get a couple of different weapon types, but you're going to use ranged weapons for the most part. There are melee weapons in the game, and some skills related to them, but it's very bare bones. It's still pretty strong though, but the main focus is definitely on the ranged gameplay with guns. You have a dodge button, different active and passive abilities to learn from 2 skill trees, and you can control Harvey as well, with some very simple commands. You need to have enough energy for using abilities, and you regenerate energy with normal attacks. The number of healing items is limited, and you can craft more of them in stations where you can also heal and save the game. Your little robot buddy also has stations where you can revive and heal, and there are more than enough of these stations throughout the game. Speaking of upgrades, you can invest scrap points into all weapons you unlock and increase their various stats. Yeah, scrap is the main currency in the game that you collect, which you use for upgrades, making health injections and so on. You can also increase your robot skills with scrap, but only at the stations that I mentioned. The weapon variety is pretty decent, but a lot of them feel same-ish. One of the reasons for that is because the combat is a bit too static, even though you can roll around like you're playing a goddamn Souls-like game. You see, the reason why Dungeon Siege formula worked so well is because it focused on party gameplay, and those games had more strategic features for organizing your party. They were still very action-based, and Dungeon Siege 2 still plays way better than Space Siege for various reasons. The gameplay in Space Siege is nowhere near as good as some other ARPGs from this time period, and when you strip away almost everything which made Dungeon Siege so good, you're left with a pretty mediocre ARPG. The level design is okay, but it can be frustrating sometimes and you can find yourself going in circles. It's linear for the most part, but you almost always have a couple of different paths to take and some backtracking here and there for specific quests. The reason why the level design feels a bit off and confusing are the same looking areas. I mean, they try their best to create some distinctive looking areas, which don't even seem to make a lot of sense in these environments. Even so, I found the level design a bit too tedious sometimes and not so fun in general. Wait, it sounds like I hate this freaking game, but I don't.
You're wrong!
I mean, I don't love it like Dungeon Siege 1 and 2, but when I start replaying those games, I will replay this one as well. It's a solid ARPG that will take you around 10 hours to complete it. I'm not surprised that this game fell into obscurity so fast, but it's a shame that you can't buy it nowadays. If you want to give it a go, I actually recommend downloading the pirated version and trying it out in your free time. It shouldn't be forgotten by any means, and I'm glad I finally got to talk about it in one of these videos. And that will be all for this episode.
Is that so? Well then, you have my gratitude.
No.
Tell me, did you play any of these games before? Leave a comment down below. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoyed the video. You can also support me by becoming a YouTube member or a Patreon. I also have some cool t-shirts and hoodies in the theme of the channel, so check that out as well. Huge thanks to all of my current supporters, and I'll see you in the next one.